The canyon wind carried her whispers away like prayer flags, fluttering into nothingness. Victoria Winters knelt at the river's edge, her long black dress pooling around her like spilled ink against the ochre riverbank. The tears that traced silent paths down her cheeks fell and joined the great Colorado, becoming one with the rushing water that had claimed her husband just 3 weeks prior. "I brought your favorite," she murmured, her fingers tracing the surface of the swift running water. "Wild sage. You always said it reminded you of our first night together." Her voice caught as she released a small bundle of dried herbs into the current, watching as the river eagerly snatched her offering. She didn't hear the soft crunch of boots on the sandy shoreline behind her, didn't notice the tall shadow stretching beside her own until a deep voice, gentle as falling dusk, spoke above her. "He hears you, madam." Victoria startled, nearly tumbling into the water herself as she whirled around. There stood a man silhouetted against the blazing Arizona sunset of 1878, tall and lean with the unmistakable bearing of a cowboy, wide-brimmed hat, duster coat despite the heat, and eyes that seemed to have seen every mile between here and the Mississippi. I beg your pardon." Victoria managed, hastily wiping tears from her face, embarrassed to be caught in such a private moment. The stranger took a respectful step back, removing his hat and revealing sun-bleached hair that had once been the color of wheat. "Forgive me for intruding, madam. Name's Frederick Hawkins. Folk around these parts just call me Hawk." He nodded toward the river. "I've known these waters most of my life. The old Apaches say the Colorado carries our words to those who have gone ahead." Victoria rose to her feet, brushing the dust from her mourning dress. "That's a lovely sentiment, Mr. Hawkins, but my husband isn't listening. He's dead." The words tasted bitter as she spoke them aloud. "The dead have better hearing than the living sometimes, Mrs. Winters, Victoria Winters." She didn't offer her hand. "And you're trespassing, sir." Frederick Hawk looked around at the wide open riverbank and the endless sky above. "Didn't realize the Almighty sold deeds to the riverside, madam." A slight smile played at his lips, not mocking but gently teasing. Despite herself, Victoria felt a corner of her mouth twitch. It was the first almost smile since Thomas had been swept away in the spring floods while trying to rescue a stranded calf. "Well, Mr. Hawkins, I came here for solitude." "As did I." He gestured to a fishing pole and small canvas bag resting further up the bank. "River's good company when a man needs to think." Victoria studied him more carefully now. He wasn't the typical drifter. His clothes were worn but clean, his face weathered but recently shaved. Most tellingly, his eyes held no desperate hunger or dangerous intent, just a quiet watchfulness and something that looked remarkably like understanding. "I should be going." Victoria gathered her shawl. "It'll be dark soon." "You have far to travel?" Hawk asked, settling his hat back on his head. "Silver Creek Ranch, about 2 miles upriver." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Thomas Winter's place." Victoria felt her spine stiffen. "Yes, my husband's ranch, my ranch now." Frederick's expression softened. "I knew Thomas, not well but enough to tip my hat to a good man. I heard about what happened during the floods. My condolences, Mrs. Winters." "Thank you," she said automatically, the words hollow from repetition. Every person in Cottonwood Falls had offered the same sentiment, usually followed by unsolicited advice about selling the ranch or remarrying quickly. "You running that spread alone now?" he asked. "I have 2 ranch hands who stayed on. The others left when—" She trailed off. "When they realized a widow couldn't pay competitive wages, when they decided a woman couldn't manage a cattle operation." Frederick nodded, understanding her unspoken words. "Tough country for anyone to make it alone." "I'm not alone," she said sharply. I have Miguel and Jeremiah, and 20 head of cattle that need tending. Good day, Mr. Hawkins. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. The river crossing can be treacherous after sundown, Mrs. Winters. Allow me to escort you home. Victoria wanted to refuse, to prove she needed no man's assistance, but the darkening sky and the memory of coyotes calling from the hills the previous night gave her pause. Very well. But I'm perfectly capable of finding my way. Never doubted it for a minute, madam. He gathered his fishing gear with swift efficiency, just offering company for the walk. They made their way along the riverside trail as the first stars began to appear. Victoria maintained a careful distance, but found herself stealing glances at her companion. He moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to long days in the saddle. "Where's your horse, Mr. Hawkins?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Left old Sampson at the livery in town. Needed the walk to clear my head." "And what troubles a man enough to walk 4 miles for fishing and solitude?" Frederick chuckled. "Might ask you the same about river whispering, Mrs. Winters." Victoria felt her cheeks warm. "Touché." As they rounded a bend in the trail, the distant lights of Silver Creek Ranch came into view. 2 oil lamps burned in the windows of the small but sturdy ranch house that Thomas had built with his own hands 5 years earlier, when they'd arrived from Philadelphia with dreams as vast as the Arizona Territory itself. "Beautiful place," Frederick remarked. "Thomas chose well." "We chose together," Victoria corrected. "I didn't come west to be a passenger in my own life, Mr. Hawkins." He nodded appreciatively. "Rare quality in anyone, man or woman." As they approached the ranch yard, a figure emerged from the barn, shotgun raised. "That's far enough, mister," came the gravelly voice of Jeremiah, her oldest ranch hand. "It's all right, Jeremiah," Victoria called out. "This is Mr. Hawkins. He was kind enough to escort me home." The old cowboy lowered his weapon but kept a suspicious eye on the stranger. "Dinner's been waiting, Mrs. Winters." Miguel's about worn a path in the kitchen floor, worrying. "I'm sorry to have concerned you." She turned to Frederick. "Thank you for your company, Mr. Hawkins." He tipped his hat. "My pleasure, Mrs. Winters. Would you care to join us for supper? It's the least I can offer for your trouble." Frederick hesitated, glancing at the still wary Jeremiah. "Don't want to impose." "It's no imposition. Miguel always cooks enough to feed a cattle drive." Inside the modest ranch house, Miguel, a young Mexican cowhand with quick hands and an even quicker smile, had indeed prepared a feast: beans, cornbread, and a venison stew that filled the small dining room with savory aromas. "Miguel, this is Mr. Hawkins. He'll be joining us this evening," Victoria explained, removing her shawl and hanging it by the door. "Any friend of Senora Victoria is welcome," Miguel said, though his eyes, like Jeremiah's, held careful assessment. Over dinner, Frederick proved himself an engaging storyteller, sharing tales of cattle drives through Apache territory and gold prospecting in California, without the boastful exaggeration common to many Western men. Victoria found herself laughing for the first time in weeks at his description of trying to teach a stubborn mule to pull a mining cart. "What brings you to Cottonwood Falls, Mr. Hawkins?" Jeremiah finally asked, his weathered face still showing traces of suspicion. "Just passing through," Frederick replied easily. "Been working as a trail guide for the Army, but my contract ended last month. Thought I'd head toward Prescott, maybe find work with one of the larger spreads." "You ever run cattle?" Jeremiah pressed. "Since I was tall enough to sit a horse without falling off. Started as a drover in Texas, worked my way up to foreman for the double-bar outfit near El Paso." Victoria noticed how both her ranch hands exchanged meaningful glances at this information. After dinner, Frederick insisted on helping Miguel with the dishes, despite the younger man's protests that guests shouldn't work. Victoria watched from the doorway as the two men fell into easy conversation about horse breeding techniques. Frederick's hands as comfortable with the mundane task of drying plates as they likely were with a lariat or rifle. "He seems capable enough," Jeremiah murmured at her elbow, startling her. "I suppose," Victoria agreed noncommittally. The old cowhand fixed her with a knowing look. "Miguel and I been talking, madam. We can't handle the spring calving with just the three of us. Been meaning to bring it up." Victoria sighed. The same problem had been weighing on her mind. "I know, Jeremiah, but we can't afford to hire on anyone else right now, not until we sell this year's calves. Might be worth asking if he's looking for temporary work," Jeremiah suggested, nodding toward Frederick. "Man knows cattle by the sound of it." When Frederick prepared to leave after dinner, Victoria found herself walking him to the edge of the ranch yard under a sky blazing with stars. The night was cool, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Thank you for your company this evening, Mr. Hawkins." It was a welcome distraction. Frederick studied her face in the silver moonlight. "You've got good men working for you, Mrs. Winters. They care about more than just their wages." "I know." Victoria gazed back at the small ranch house. "But two men can't run a growing operation." Thomas had plans to expand next year, take on more cattle. Frederick was quiet for a moment. "Jeremiah mentioned you might be looking for an extra hand through calving season." Victoria's eyes widened slightly. "He's rather direct, isn't he? Most good cowboys are." Frederick smiled. "I hadn't planned on staying in the area, but I'm not due in Prescott until late spring." "Are you offering your services, Mr. Hawkins?" "At a fair wage, yes. I'm a good hand with cattle, better with horses, and I don't mind taking orders from a woman who knows her business." Victoria considered the offer. An experienced cowhand would be invaluable during calving, especially one who claimed not to bristle at working for a female rancher. Yet caution made her hesitate. "References?" she asked. "Captain James Ellison at Fort Verde can vouch for me." "As can Samuel Whitman at the Double Bar." Victoria nodded. "I'll send Miguel to telegraph Fort Verde tomorrow. If Captain Ellison speaks well of you, we can discuss terms." Frederick touched the brim of his hat. "Fair enough, madam. I'll be at the Cottonwood Inn if you need to reach me." Victoria watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually dissolving into the darkness. Only when he had completely disappeared did she realize she'd been holding her breath. 2 days later, Frederick Hawkins arrived at Silver Creek Ranch with his dun gelding and few possessions. Captain Ellison's telegram had been effusive in its praise for the most reliable scout and guide the Army has employed in the territory. Victoria had offered fair but modest wages, which Frederick had accepted without negotiation. The first weeks passed in a blur of activity. Spring brought not only new calves, but also the countless tasks that winter's passing revealed: fences needing repair, irrigation ditches to clear, a roof that leaked during the last heavy rain. Frederick proved himself as capable as his references had suggested, working from dawn until dusk alongside Jeremiah and Miguel without complaint. Victoria often found herself watching him when he wasn't aware: the careful way he handled newborn calves, his patience with the horses, how he never spoke over her when she gave directions for the day's work. Unlike many men she'd encountered since Thomas's death, Frederick treated her with respect that held no condescension or veiled pity. One evening, almost a month after Frederick's arrival, Victoria was reviewing the ranch accounts at the kitchen table when she heard a commotion outside. She rushed to the door to find Frederick leading in a limping Jeremiah, the old cowhand's face contorted with pain. "What happened?" she demanded, helping them through the door. Horse stepped in a gopher hole, Jeremiah grunted. Threw me hard. Damn ankles busted for sure. They eased him into a chair while Miguel boiled water for hot compresses. Victoria carefully removed Jeremiah's boot, revealing an ankle already swollen to twice its normal size. "We need to get the doctor," she said, concern etching her features. Frederick nodded. "I'll ride into town right away." By midnight, Dr. Lansdale had confirmed what they already suspected: a broken ankle that would take at least 6 weeks to heal properly. Victoria saw the worry in Jeremiah's eyes as the doctor splinted his leg. "Don't you fret about the work," she assured him. "You focus on healing." But after the doctor left, the 3 able-bodied members of Silver Creek Ranch faced one another across the kitchen table, with the unspoken truth hanging between them. They were now critically short-handed just as calving season reached its peak. "We'll manage," Victoria said with more confidence than she felt. Frederick rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "I know a good hand in Cottonwood Falls who might be available. Worked with him on a drive last year. Honest fellow." "Can he start tomorrow?" Victoria asked. "I'll ride in at first light and find out." The next several days tested everyone's endurance. Frederick's friend, a soft-spoken man named Ellis, joined them, but even with 4 people working, there weren't enough hours in the day. Victoria found herself in the saddle from dawn until well after dark, checking on pregnant heifers, helping deliver calves, and still trying to manage the business side of the ranch. One night, after a particularly difficult breech birth that had required both her and Frederick's intervention to save mother and calf, Victoria collapsed onto the porch steps, too exhausted to make it all the way inside. Her hands were raw, her back ached fiercely, and her eyes burned from lack of sleep. She didn't hear Frederick approach until he sat beside her, offering a steaming cup of coffee. "You should rest, Mrs. Winters," he said gently. "You've been going hard for 3 days straight." Victoria accepted the cup gratefully, letting its warmth seep into her cold hands. "So have you, Mr. Hawkins. So have all of us." "True enough." He looked out at the starlit pasture where new calves nestled against their mothers. "But you're trying to be rancher, accountant, cook, and nurse all at once. Even Thomas would have struggled with that load." At the mention of her husband's name, Victoria felt the familiar pang of grief, though somehow less sharp than before. Thomas would have found a way to make it all work. Frederick was quiet for a moment. "May I speak plainly, Mrs. Winters?" "When have you ever not, Mr. Hawkins?" she replied with a tired smile. "You're killing yourself trying to prove something that doesn't need proving." Everyone here, Jeremiah, Miguel, even Ellis, who's known you less than a week, we all see how capable you are. You don't have to do everything alone to demonstrate that. Victoria stared into her coffee, wanting to bristle at his words but finding them too accurate to dismiss. "If I fail at this ranch, it won't be seen as Victoria Winters failed. It will be seen as proof that a woman can't succeed at a man's business." Frederick turned to face her directly. "Is that why you're doing this? To prove something to folks in town?" "No," she admitted after a long pause. "I'm doing it because this land, these animals, they were our dream. Mine and Thomas's. Letting it go would be like losing him all over again." In the silver moonlight, she could see understanding in Frederick's eyes. Not pity, not judgment, just recognition of her truth. "The river," he said softly. Victoria looked puzzled. "What about it? The day we met, you were talking to Thomas at the river's edge, keeping him present in the only way you knew how." Victoria felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "It sounds foolish when you say it aloud." "Not foolish at all." Frederick's voice was gentle. "After my wife died of fever back in '69, I carried her handkerchief for 3 years. Used to take it out at night and tell her about my day, like she was right there listening." Victoria stared at him, surprised by this revelation. You were married, he nodded. Catherine. We had barely 2 years together before typhoid took her. No children, thankfully. Don't think I could have managed a little one on the trail. I'm sorry, Victoria said, seeing him in a new light. I didn't realize. No reason you should have. It was a long time ago. He smiled faintly. My point is, I understand wanting to hold on, and I understand that sometimes the work, the exhaustion, it keeps the worst of the grief at bay. Victoria felt something within her chest loosen, a knot of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Thomas was everything to me. We came west with such plans. Tell me about him, Frederick said, settling more comfortably on the step, and so she did. As the night deepened around them, Victoria shared stories of Thomas, his laugh that could fill a room, his stubborn insistence on building the house himself, despite having no carpentry experience, the way he'd read poetry to the cattle, because he claimed it made their meat more tender. Frederick listened without interruption, occasionally asking a question that revealed he was truly engaged in her memories. When she finally fell silent, Victoria realized she felt lighter than she had in months. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For letting me remember the joy, not just the loss. Frederick smiled, a warm, genuine expression that reached his eyes. Thomas sounds like a fine man who loved his wife fiercely, can't fault his taste. The compliment, unexpected and sincere, brought color to Victoria's cheeks. It's late. We should both get some rest. As spring gave way to early summer, the rhythm of ranch life established a new normal. Jeremiah supervised operations from the porch, his expertise still valuable even if his mobility was limited. Ellis proved a dependable worker, and the calving season concluded successfully with minimal losses. Victoria found herself looking forward to the evening meals when everyone gathered around the table, sharing the day's stories. Frederick had become not just a valued employee, but a friend, whose opinion she sought on ranch matters, and whose company she increasingly enjoyed. One afternoon, as they rode the fence line together checking for needed repairs, Victoria realized with startling clarity that her heart beat faster when Frederick was near. The recognition of her own feelings both alarmed and exhilarated her. "Storm's coming," Frederick remarked, nodding toward dark clouds building in the west. "We should head back." Victoria glanced at the threatening sky. "We're closer to the river than the ranch house. There's an old line shack near the bend. We can wait it out there." They urged their horses to a faster pace, reaching the small one-room structure just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Inside, the shack was dusty but intact, with a small wood stove, a rough-hewn table, and a narrow cot. Frederick busied himself starting a fire while Victoria checked their supplies. They had a canteen of water, some jerky, and a small flask of whiskey Frederick carried for medicinal purposes. Outside, the storm unleashed its fury. Rain pounded the roof while lightning split the sky and thunder shook the small building. Their horses, secured in the lean-to attached to the shack, nickered nervously. "Quite a gully washer," Frederick commented, pouring a small measure of whiskey into 2 tin cups. "Might be here a while." Victoria accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. "I haven't been caught in a storm like this since Thomas and I first came to Silver Creek." Frederick settled onto an upturned crate. "What happened?" "We were surveying the property on horseback when a summer storm hit without warning. Ended up sheltering in a shallow cave for hours." She smiled at the memory. "Thomas was convinced a mountain lion would find us, but all we encountered was a very wet jackrabbit with the same idea." Frederick chuckled. "Nature has a way of reminding us who's really in charge out here." They fell into comfortable conversation, as rain drummed steadily overhead. Victoria found herself studying the lines of Frederick's face in the warm glow of the stove, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the strong jaw softened by a day's stubble, the small scar near his right eyebrow. "How did you get that?" she asked, gesturing to the scar. Frederick touched it reflexively. "Bar fight in Tucson, only one I've ever been in. Fellow took exception to me defending a Chinese laundry worker he was roughing up. Did you win?" "Wouldn't call it winning exactly, more like surviving." He grinned. "But the other fellow looked worse and the laundry worker got away clean." Victoria found herself smiling back. "You're not what I expected, Frederick Hawkins." "Is that good or bad, Mrs. Winters?" "Victoria," she said suddenly. "After all these months, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "Victoria," he repeated, the name sounding like music in his deep voice. "Then I must insist you call me Hawk. Frederick always sounded too formal for a saddle tramp like me." "You're hardly a saddle tramp," Victoria objected. "You're the most capable, honorable man I've met since." She trailed off, suddenly aware of the direction of her thoughts. "Since Thomas," he finished quietly. Victoria nodded, unable to look away from his gaze. The storm outside seemed to fade, the small shack suddenly intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. "I should check on the horses," Hawk said, breaking the moment. He rose and went to the door, letting in a blast of damp air as he stepped outside briefly. When he returned, water dripping from his hat, Victoria had composed herself. "Are they all right?" "Fine. Drier than we'd be out there." He removed his wet coat and hung it near the stove. "Rain's letting up some, should be able to head back soon." Victoria felt an unexpected disappointment at the thought. "That's good. Jeremiah will worry if we're gone too long." Hawk nodded, resuming his seat across from her. "Victoria," he began, then hesitated. "I've been meaning to tell you I received a letter from the Circle M Ranch near Prescott. They're offering me a position as foreman starting next month." Victoria felt as if the air had been sucked from the small room. "Oh, congratulations." "I haven't accepted yet," he said, watching her face carefully. "It sounds like a good opportunity," she managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Better than what a small operation like Silver Creek can offer." "Is that what you think this is about? Better wages, isn't it?" Victoria stood and moved to the small window, looking out at the rain-soaked landscape. A foreman's position at a large ranch is what any sensible cowhand would want. She heard him rise and approach, stopping just behind her. "Victoria, look at me." Slowly she turned. He stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, could smell the lingering scent of wood smoke and leather that always seemed to surround him. "I didn't come to Silver Creek for sensible reasons," Hawk said softly. "I came because a stubborn, proud woman intrigued me from the moment I saw her whispering her heart to a river." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. "Hawk, I've stayed these months for reasons that have nothing to do with wages or cattle." His voice dropped lower. "But I won't stay where I'm not wanted. If you tell me to take that foreman's job, I'll ride out when my time's up, no hard feelings." Victoria searched his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath his usual calm confidence. "And if I asked you to stay?" "Then wild horses couldn't drag me from Silver Creek." Victoria felt years of grief and loneliness crumble like a dam breaking. Without conscious thought, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the scar she'd asked about earlier. "I don't want you to go." Hawk covered her hand with his own, turning to press a gentle kiss to her palm. "Then I'll stay, for as long as you'll have me." "What about your wandering ways?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've never struck me as a man to put down roots." "Maybe I've just been wandering until I found the right place. The right person." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I never expected to find either again after Catherine died." Victoria felt tears threatening. "I thought loving Thomas meant I could never love again. That it would dishonor his memory somehow." Hawk shook his head. "Love doesn't work that way. It isn't finite. Loving again doesn't diminish what you had with him." "How did you become so wise, Cowboy?" Victoria asked, a smile breaking through her tears. "Not wisdom. Experience." He drew her closer. "May I kiss you, Victoria Winters?" In answer, she rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened with months of unacknowledged longing. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I should have done that the day you hired me," Hawk murmured. Victoria laughed softly. "I would have fired you on the spot. Worth the risk." He smiled, tucking her against his chest where she could hear the strong beat of his heart. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world glittering in the afternoon sun. They rode back to the ranch side by side, a new understanding between them that needed no words. In the weeks that followed, Silver Creek Ranch flourished under their combined care. Victoria's business acumen paired with Hawk's practical ranching knowledge created a partnership that strengthened them both. Jeremiah, his ankle healing well, watched their blossoming relationship with quiet approval, while Miguel teased them gently about the boss and the boss's boss whenever they exchanged meaningful glances across the dinner table. On a warm evening in late summer, Hawk took Victoria back to the river where they had first met. The Colorado flowed peaceful and golden in the setting sun, a far cry from the raging torrent that had taken Thomas months before. They sat together on a sun-warmed rock, Victoria's head resting against Hawk's shoulder as they watched the water flow past. "I have something for you," Hawk said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small leather pouch and placed it in her palm. Inside, Victoria found a simple gold band set with a small turquoise stone. She looked up at him, her heart suddenly racing. "It was my mother's," Hawk explained. "One of the few things I've carried with me all these years. Catherine wore it until she passed." "It's beautiful," Victoria whispered. "Victoria Winters, I'm not a man of great fortune or fancy words, but I love you with everything I am. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Victoria closed her fingers around the ring, tears blurring her vision. "Are you certain?" "Silver Creek will never be the biggest ranch in the territory." "I don't want the biggest ranch. I want this one with you." He took her face gently between his hands. "I want mornings waking beside you and evenings watching the sunset from our porch. I want to help raise the finest cattle in Arizona and maybe, if you're willing, a child or two to inherit what we build together." Victoria's heart swelled with joy so intense it was almost painful. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at Silver Creek Ranch. Jeremiah gave the bride away. Miguel served as best man, and the entire town of Cottonwood Falls turned out to celebrate the union of the widow Winters and the cowboy who'd found her whispering to a river. As the years passed, Silver Creek Ranch grew and prospered under their stewardship. The following spring brought their first child, a daughter they named Catherine Thomas Hawkins in honor of those they had loved and lost. 2 years later, a son joined the family, and the ranch house expanded to accommodate their growing family. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Victoria and Hawk would walk hand in hand to the river's edge. There, under the vast Arizona sky, they would whisper their gratitude to the flowing waters for second chances, for love found amid loss, and for the healing power of a heart brave enough to begin again. And sometimes, if you listened closely, you might hear the river whisper back,